joy to see you, Professor Wow.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I know you spoke at Africa Day accounting for us the last time I was in Ottawa. It's really great to see what young researchers are doing. And by the way, you are a very great host. I've only watched you for a few minutes, but go girl, you're doing a great job, all right? Great to be here. And so, again, all protocols observed. I want to acknowledge all the our professor, your excellencies. I don't know all the embassies represented, but your excellencies, I acknowledge your presence. Ethiopia, I acknowledge your presence. And of course, Dr. Mukebe, thank you again for having me. On Africa Day, we celebrated that on the 24th of May. And a young gentleman walked up to me after all the presentations, the ambassadors at the event. I think we had about 12 of them. It was at Caltech, Professor Awal was there. And I think it was our fourth commemoration of Africa Day in Ottawa. And we had taken it upon ourselves to celebrate Africa Day, because if we don't celebrate ourselves, who's going to celebrate us, And so we decided to do that, and this young man met me and said, look, we have this major event, we're going to launch it, and all of that, we want you to come speak, are you going to come? I said, well, you let me know what the details are. If it's worth the effort, I will. And I'm really glad that I'm here this morning. And numbers matter, but how we start matters even more. So, of course, as you begin to look forward to growing your numbers, that's great to do, but it's how you start, the structures you lay, the people, the motive, and how you grow your movement. That's really what matters. You go on with it, you lay the right structures, the sky won't even be your limit, okay? All right, so my speech this morning, I do have a speech, all right? So my speech this morning, will focus on the theme, which is Beyond the Stereotype, African Descent as Architects of Excellence. I wanted to acknowledge our Director Architect, Oyelade, also who is here with me this morning from CASA Foundation. CASA does have an office at Carleton University, because we partner with them and we do a lot of projects. So we have an office in Ottawa, and so we do come in from time to time. Thank you again for having me, WARESA. Today, I begin by congratulating WARESA America and its leadership for creating the awards categories to recognize the accomplishments and outstanding work of researchers in North America, and for convening the 5th NEREC competition. Today, we celebrate not just the contributions of outstanding African researchers, but we chart a path that demonstrates with evidence and conviction that people of African descent are builders of communities and economies. We're innovators in science, pioneers in technology, and leaders in global enterprise. From the lessons of our mothers, who sold in markets to send many of us to school back in Africa, to the communal systems that educated millions on the continent of Africa and continue to do so till today. The African story continues to inspire. After all, it takes a village. We're not only resilient people, but we're determined. We're determined to do well, such that even when we come into a new country as newcomers, we're really looking for the opportunities, not just to study, but what else does it take? How can I find my way around here quickly? If I need to find a job, if I need to support what my parents sent me here to do by getting all the sources of revenue and income, that's what we're known to do. That's the African spirit. And I dare say, that is the spirit of the people that are here in this room today. And so what's the African inspiration? The African inspiration rests on the resilience of its people. They never say that spirit. They never stop trying spirit. The I can do spirit. That's what we have. Of course, a lot of people call it black entitlement. I've read research these days. In fact, they talk about what you call black tax. I don't know if people have heard about that. And say, oh, it's like black entitlement, black tax, and all kinds of things. That's fine. Evidence-based research also alludes to that. That okay, because we rely a lot on family members, we rely on our parents, uncles, aunties. You can actually go in the morning and knock on the door of an uncle without giving notice, and he opens his doors, welcomes you in, and so some people tag that as black entitlement or tax, because that's perhaps tax they're not paying to government, just in case you didn't know. Tax not being paid to government, maybe because of the regulatory absence of the proper regulatory framework and policies. So they're not collecting that tax, but they're spending it on a cousin here, an auntie there, because you need to keep remitting money to them. And I'm not even talking about remitting from here. I'm talking about not diaspora remittances. uncle in the village.
Yeah.
You know, oh, your sister just gave birth to your children, so your children are here. They're not your children. You know what I mean? But you have to take care of them, you send them to school. So a lot of people tag that as black tax. It isn't black tax to us. It's actually how we take care of ourselves. Without the social systems back home, a lot of people will never survive in Africa. And so that's what we rely on. And that's what gives us the courage. And that's what gives us the strength when you come into a new place, because you've done it back there. And so you're not just going to come here and count the bridge again. You're going to come here and think about it. What works? How am I going to do it? And what's going to make it happen for me? And that's the African spirit. And so, what's excellence? We understand, we hope to learn and train ourselves. We raise community giants through the communal and the villages that we come from. And I say that, I know some of you are from the cities, but that just includes the villages. We understand the possibilities. We ask the how, we ask the who to do what with, we ask the where, and then we learn to act. That's the African spirit. So what is excellence? We're talking about the African excellence. Excellence is defined as a quality of being outstanding or extremely good. And our race is paired with a long list of excellent people, contrary to the stereotypes that we have seen. The hallmark of our heroes past, whose stories moved us from misery to poverty and from hopelessness to excellence. It moved us from the place of misery and poverty to hope, from the place of hopelessness to excellence. And so I cite a few quickly. I know you have all the examples from our various countries and the continent itself, but Wangari Maathai, the founder of the Green Belt movement, who faced pushback from Western interest, yet in 2004 became the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in sustainable development, democracy, and peace. In literature, we have people like the renowned author Olutoyin, is Nigerian, first Black Nobel laureate, the author of Weep Not Child. I'm not sure how many people read that. I'm old school, but I recall more than 30 years ago, it was mandatory for every Nigerian school to read that. He's actually a Kenyan author, I think. Yeah. I could twist my tongue, but we all read it. We were made to read it. He talked about colonialism. He talked about the bitterness of colonialism. And he talked about how we could actually overcome all of those challenges that we had with, of course, in quotes, racism back then, how we couldn't get the right jobs because they all had to be filled with the colonial masters first and foremost before we could ever get a chance. Well, that book talked about that. Achebe, Nigerian also, things fall apart, no longer at ease, talks about the caste system and how people should not be segregated and so on. Of course, things fall apart also talks about the colonial era too. Alex Haley, roots, slavery and how people came out of that. All of these authors were Africans. They did well, they wrote, they put their talent into place, and they crafted and shaped our values, the values which we represent today. So they framed the narratives that moved us from despair to dignity as African people. In medicine, I cite a few examples too. In human sciences, Olutoyin was the first doctor to do, a professor of surgery and pediatrics, Ohio State University, had the honor of performing the first surgery on an unborn child. The first surgery on an unborn child. That's an African, 25 weeks old Carrie. He removed that tumor from her brain, and it became, he made history. That's African. He follows the traditions of other legendary African physicians like Christian Bernard of Cape Town in South Africa, who performed the first human heart transplant in 1967. All Africans. These are some of the feats performed by our people. In business, we have a lot of examples too. I know we all know about Dangote, I'll talk about Dangote, but yeah, there is Strive Masiyiwa of Zimbabwe, who is the chairman of Econet. I'm sure maybe a few Africans would remember. Econet Technologies, Cassava Technology. He's the first only black billionaire in the United Kingdom. That's Strive Masiyiwa. He's from from Zimbabwe, and of course we have Aliko Dangote. He's Nigerian. A lot of people would have heard about him. He installed the Dangote refinery in Nigeria, the world's largest single train refinery, and is currently ranked as the richest black African. These are Africans. They are making their mark on the world stage. We can do so. We cite the examples today as examples of excellence. And so, let's consider our systems. Let's consider the impact of the informal social systems that I alluded to earlier. These informal social systems has mobilized a lot of community groups, managing cultural needs, accounting for more than 30% of Africa's GDP. GDP, like your gross domestic product. Accounting for how we account for revenues, how we do business. Of course, a lot of people talk about it's informal. It's informal because it's not documented. So we're remitting funds home, we're not going through the systems, we have Western Union, you just remit it and all of that to mama, to papa, wherever they are. So not formal structures. Unlike when you have bonds, you're investing in bonds, so when you want to bond, instruments, government instruments, securities, where you trade. So the Securities Exchange Commission can capture how you're sending money, how you're remitting money because you're in the diaspora. So when you send money, 50 today, 100 tomorrow, it's really not documented because an uncle is going, you give him an envelope, deliver to mama in the village. That's informal. You understand what I mean? That's what I'm talking about. 30% of such informalities account actually for the 30% of GDP of Africa. And remember again the example I cited earlier, my uncle's family is your family. My uncle's children say, oh, your children are going to school and need money, and so on. And so you're wondering who actually gave back to the child. But that's how we are culturally. That's who we are. And that's actually what makes us strong, as a community, I have seen. And so I can knock on my old classmates' door in Kampala tomorrow without notice, or send a text to a friend in Dakar because he created a business, and say, and because we were classmates, he's sharing his papers with me, he's sharing his executive summary with me, he's done his research, and he believes the business will sell like hotcakes. And I'm able to send him some money to say, here I am, maybe one of your first 10 investors. That's actually what keeps Africa strong. As informal as that appears to be, and now that's not to suggest that we shouldn't make it as formal or formalize the structure and put the right foundational structures in place, because we will do even much better. I'm sure 100 times better, 1,000 times more. But I'm saying the Africa, as we speak today, has been kept in the long run because of some of the structures. And so I speak to researchers. Today I speak to the resilience of founders, too many to count. And I dare say that African entrepreneurs continue to redefine the global markets. These examples remind us that rejection, adversity, tragedy, tribulation do not define our destiny. It is the resilience and the vision and the company that we keep, the impact that we make, and we grow communities that we belong to, that actually defines who we are. It's actually the hallmark of success. So much it's important. Of course, we need the capital, we need the funds, we need all the money. It's actually not the money, so much of the money that actually defines us as very successful people. It is the level of impact that we're making in the lives that we encounter on a daily basis. That's actually my own definition of success. It's my definition of significance. It's my definition of sustainability. Because the more you do that, the more you build goodwill. And goodwill has a way of keeping you in business. Because any business can collapse. I'm sure you saw that during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Any business can collapse. But goodwill actually helps you to sustain the business in the long term. After all, a lot of our mentors and a lot of our professors tell us that we're usually a sum total of our education, our environment, our experiences, and our exposure. So, like people tell us the 4 E's, when you really want to define who a person is, that a man is actually, a man, I say that, everyone, yeah? A man is some product or byproduct of the education he has received, the environment in which he operates, the experiences that has shaped his life, and the people he's exposed to, exposure, and so on. So I'm sure we understand what I mean by that. And so for centuries, our people have faced stereotypes, systematic barriers, yet we continue to rise, building enterprise, enterprises in shaping culture and advancing science. However, here are the hard questions to ask ourselves. For Castle Foundation, for instance, as one of the organizations that manage the Black Entrepreneurship Program of the Federal Government of Canada, and other support programs, including Friends of Africa Women Entrepreneur Exchange, and the Black Advisory Hub, which is sponsored by the federal government, now in 4 provinces of Canada, I often ask myself, what is the impact on economic development, business growth, and funding opportunities of all of these programs that we're managing? How is it really touching people? Are people able to access this? Are lives improving on account of all of this? Are we progressing as a people and as a market? Are we contributing to the GDP of Canada itself? Because like Professor Wall alluded to, we need to sort ourselves out here. The better we become here, the more impactful we can become at home. All right, so that's the question to ask ourselves. These questions are not only compelling to fast-track socio-economic development, but they're also imperative for the growth, the governance, and the sustainability of our ecosystems. If we keep asking ourselves these questions, we answer those questions, then we'll understand we have gaps, huge gaps. But then we can measure how well we're doing, where the gaps are, how to cover the gaps, find the talents to bridge the gap, and then we understand what do we need? Where can we get solutions even from? But today I stand at a hinge of history. And from where I stand, from the research that we have looked at, I dare say that we have actually made a lot of progress. We have made a lot of progress in the past 5 years than in the last 15 years. And I will share some details of that. And why do I say so? Let's quickly look at the evidence. The data speaks clearly. In Canada alone, the Black population has more than doubled since the 1990s, and today there are 1.5 million Black Canadians, representing 4.3% of the entire population of Canada. In the United States, nearly 47 million people identify as Black African Americans, about 14% of the population. Together across the Americas, these communities form a critical mass of talent, creativity, innovation across vertical sectors, enterprise, education, the sciences, and government. And they are building. In the US, there are about 3.5 million Black-owned businesses employing over 1.2 million people. In Canada, we had 66,000 Black-owned businesses as of 2020, Statistics Canada. And that was before the pandemic, largely concentrated in Ontario and Quebec. Remembering again that Ontario itself as a province controls about 60% of the economic activity of Canada. As of 2023, according to Statistics Canada, the number has risen to 166,000, with entrepreneurship steadily rising. And we talk about 3 years. Why is this? Why did this happen? How did that happen, and why is it so? I quickly share with you. Before 2020, as you might recall, we didn't have what we call the Black Entrepreneurship Program. And so the Black Entrepreneurship Program was launched in August of 2021. August of 2021, the announcement was made by the federal government then that $401 million would be released to the Black community, of course, including all of us, right? Black community. And we had 66,000 businesses prior to that. The goal of the Black Entrepreneurship Program was to ensure that we had raised entrepreneurs, stimulate, develop business activities within the Black community, make sure people begin to open businesses. After all, a lot of people have been making submissions, research, showing that we are products of a business environment. It may not be massive, but mothers traded in the market, sold tomatoes, sold clothing, sold fabrics, and so on. And so we kind of actually were born or were birthed with that entrepreneurial spirit, kind of from back in Africa. And so why are you not able to replicate that? And you just want to stay with the 9-to-5 jobs. But then there were opportunities for people even after the 9-to-5 jobs to do like a 5-to-6 or a 5-to-7 or a 5-to-9 working from home. You know, like baking cakes in the kitchen and selling to the community, or little things like within the beads, and braiding the hair and things like that. Now I talk about women, but of course even the male folk, mechanics and so on. We could actually do a lot of things. The car makes a certain sound. I mean, that's how I was raised anyway. The car makes a certain sound. You go into the car actually and you touch a few things and then it kicks off again. So the men also had that kind of entrepreneurial spirit where they could kind of DIY, like do it yourself and things like that. And so if you really allude to the fact that you have all of these talents and so on, why don't you put it to work? Why don't you serve community? And all of that. Because that was what the research was saying, that we were born, that was the way we were born, that was how we were trained by our mothers and so on. So it was during the pandemic, the crisis, after the George Floyd incident, if you might recall, that the federal government launched this and say, okay, let's try you guys. You've been talking and shouting all over the place that you know about entrepreneurship. It's not only the other counterparts that know about it. We're trying with this type of funding and see how many people will access the funding. That was why the 401 million was released. And so, of course, a few people who had done a lot of business and so on, it was trusted into the hands of NGOs, NPOs, non-profit organizations to manage. There was a loan part where people have given 250, from 25K to 250, you could access loans from the federal government as a black entrepreneur. And so they wanted you to now kickstart that entrepreneurial spirit and start your own venture, whether it's baking, whether it's food and beverages, whether it's fashion, whether it's managing the mechanic workshop and so on. And so all of that started then. And so that's what gave rise from 66,000 to 166,000. So that's just my way of explaining it. Because then I know for sure that about 9,500 entrepreneurs were trained by us. And then the loan part of it from FACE, which is the Federation of African Canadian Economies. They were mandated to give the loans, and they are still in the business of giving the loans. It's there actually. And so they started giving out the loans. As of last year, they had done 500 loans, 250,000 or below. People who opened restaurants, barber shops, schools, and so on. And so all of this started growing within that period, that span of time. And that's why today we have, at least per Statistics Canada, as of 2023, it was 166,000. As of today, we don't have evidence-based research, we don't have the statistics, but estimates, of course, there are researchers in the room, but I can actually tell you, I'm also a business person, so I'm a scholar practitioner, I'm not just a scholar. So I tell you, this is our own field, and so we can give you reports from the field because of the people we trained, that I dare say that we must have 250,000 since 2023, and today, my own personal estimates, of course. But I see a lot of them. People selling from the trunks of their car, so they don't have a shop. So the people right here on this campus, who actually will do what you call a makeup service for people going to a party, they don't have a shop, they don't have a registered business, but they're doing business. And they're taking money for the businesses that they're doing. So I count those, because that's how we started before we became well structured. I hope you understand. So I would say my own number, estimate, fear, 250, and so on. All right, in the medical sector, medicine, black professionals in medicine and engineering, in academia, in finance, and creative industries make outsized contributions to the GDP. They create jobs, they're employing people every day, and all of their efforts dovetail into community prosperity. Examples from medical field, about 5.7% of US physicians identify as black. 23% of the physicians trained outside the US were trained in sub-Saharan Africa. 23%, I say that again, 23% of the physicians trained outside of the US before they came into the US were trained in sub-Saharan Africa. In Canada, 22% of physicians that are deemed foreign trained were trained in Ghana, in South Africa, and in Nigeria. So the brain gain, the brain drain, I think is what we call the brain drain, that happened in Africa has actually saved Canada an estimated 4.5 billion USD. Meaning these countries trained their medical practitioners, trained their engineers. Those guys came here. A lot of them were trained by the state, if you get what I mean, like free scholarship, I think. Yeah, something like that. Now they came here. This is where they are actually contributing all that they garnered through education. That their talents and their skills have saved the country of Canada alone, about 13.5 billion. It's called medical immigration. It's called medical immigration. And I do have my statistics here, and I'm sure I can give some of the notes to some of you as I conclude, because I do have the references also. But just to save time, I won't need to read all of that. All right? So, brain drain in Africa has become, it's called medical immigration, engineering, education, depending on the field, has saved a lot of money in these countries. So this is how we have contributed to the GDP. In engineering and business, in 2020, Statistics Canada reported that 145,000 black-owned businesses constituted 2.4% of all businesses in Canada. Post-pandemic, I alluded to that. That was the figure, but then after the pandemic, the number shot beyond the roof. Programs like Rise Up Pitch at the Toronto Metropolitan University, it's a combination, joint effort of CAS Foundation and the Toronto Metropolitan University. It's called Rise Up Pitch. Those programs will receive 2,000 applications annually. Pitch, as the name sounds, pitch. You know, like you pitch for funding, 5,000, 10,000. But they would receive, and it's for black women only. GMU, Rise Up Pitch, CAS Foundation. 2,000 applications annually. This shows the scale of ambition of these groups of people. They want funding, they want mentorship, they want resources, they're ambitious, they need it, and they want to fill the gaps. So these are not stories of marginal participation. They are stories of upward trajectory of a people who are shifting from survival to strategy. They are thinking, they want to be part of the solution. They are shifting from stereotypes to excellence, the African excellence that we're defined by. But the challenges remain. And some of the challenges that I identified quickly because of the work that we've done with community remain a lack of appropriate research data to measure and report the contributions, the real contributions of the people of African descent, separate from the black specific groups in all of these countries. And so you notice that I was reading out a lot of statistics and I was saying the black community. The black community, Africa is different, do you know what I mean? Yeah, so we really don't have a way of really separating and quantifying what exactly have Africans done. So some of the specific, and I'm sure maybe some of the researchers in the room would help, but some of the ones that I could find clearly were those ones that have to do with medical immigration. This one, and they say, 22% of medical doctors that are now working in so-so-so place were actually trained in so-so-so place. So if they really had to pay, they should actually be paying what they have gained or a percentage of what they have gained. The other challenges remain that black-owned businesses are smaller on the African-owned businesses are smaller on average, and they are less likely to scale into employer firms, meaning do they have the capacity to really employ labor? And so they are doing all of the work that we talked about, but half of the time they remain solopreneurs, as it were, solo, like they are just alone, running it by themselves. So you're the social media manager, you're the bookkeeper, you're the one baking in the kitchen, you're the one selling and like typing everything. So you're solo. You don't have the capacity to hire other people. So these kinds of businesses are less likely to scale into employer firms. Then the access to capital remains unequal, and higher rejection rates are limited, and they have a way of limiting growth because there is no funding. Mentorship networks and procurement channels also remain harder to access, because the truth remains that these challenges are real because of a lack of structure. And you will agree with me, like a lack of structure. Even most of the businesses we're talking about, a high percentage of them are not registered because they lack funding, and perhaps because a lot of them really do not understand what it takes to be registered. Because sometimes to just put some structure behind your business is not hiring all the top lawyers and so on. It's just a simple, like going on Corporations Canada and just putting your business name in so that at least you can get a number and make sure that you're registered. It's as simple as that. And I'm sure that we can even do another lecture on that. It's simple, and I'm not just stereotyping. Like I said, I'm a scholar practitioner, and these are things that we have done. The challenges are real, but like the examples of rejections, they are signals of the scale of opportunity before us. So there are opportunities in all of these challenges. Now we must be laser focused to turn our challenges into wins. So friends, if we have made such progress in the last 4 or 5 years, or in the last 10, 20 years, I don't want to go all the way back to 1605, but if you have made, so let's just keep it to maybe the ones that we can relate to here, like if you look at the age bracket. If we have made this type of progress, my call to you then is simple. The journey must continue. We must not stop. We must not rest on our oars. Now, there are 3 priority areas that I want us to concentrate on. As we build ourselves and as we build our businesses, whether we're building from the small, like dorm rooms, or from the trunk of our car because you finally have a car and you're able to sell your baked goods, whatever it is, or beads from the trunk of your car, or you actually have a high store building, like in a mall. What is important is that we must begin to focus on 3 priority areas. I just wanted 3 so that we can focus on those 3. We need to create wealth, we need to build allies, and we need to scale pathways. What do I mean by those? Creating wealth. How do we create wealth? Wealth is built through knowledge. Knowledge, access, and action. Access is key. A lot of people have ideas. A lot of people have friends, but they have no access to resources. When we talk about access to resources, we're not talking about funding alone. That's where a lot of people start from. Knowledge itself is power when you apply it. Because you can have the knowledge, but when you refuse to apply it, it hasn't become power yet. So it is actually the application of the knowledge that we have, or the ideas that we're running with, that becomes powerful to us. And the access we're talking about, we talk about people saying our network is our net worth. And how do you access those types of people? The people that have the funds. The people that can actually say, my classmates here. And I can quickly cite an example. I know for sure that I had 17 years of investment banking practice. I was never a business person. But after the global financial crisis, I had to start a business because how long are you going to do that? Because I've been in that field for so long, reviewing other people's credits. And so I had an idea of the kinds of credits that were coming to my table, and it will appear big, and we'll be identifying the risks, mitigating the risk. If the owner dies, what do you do with the money? Who will you pass it on to? Those are the structural issues I'm talking about, because they're so removed. But then I put on my thinking cap, and then I had to meet with a lot of people. Very difficult to do. But when we're focused, and we understand the sector we're going into, and we're able to identify maybe the top 5, top 10 in that sector, or even the last 50, at least they've started, they've run the business for 5 years. What do you know? How did you do it? What should I do? What should I not do? If you approach about 10 of them, guaranteed about 7 will never tell you the story. Because you know what I mean? People keep their stories, it's your patterns, right? And so a lot of people are scared also, I don't want you to take over the market from me. These are genuine fears. But there will be 1 or 2 in those markets, if you search one, that will sit you down and tell you a few things about what they know about the business. That's access. You need to gain access. And the fastest way to gain access is by volunteering. You volunteer for the award. That's what I did in this Canada. I had to sit down in those organizations. 2 months today, 3 months in another, and so on. Within the first year, I had a fair understanding of how they were doing it. I didn't know many things for sure. But I had that's why I said, a fair understanding of what I never ran a non-profit before. I didn't even know what it was. It was this Canada that I was starting. But next month we're 15 years, CASA Foundation. And for the 401 million we talked about, is public information. We are running that with the federal government as an agent, of course. But how did we get there? We had to understand the nuances, the intersectionalities. What should you say? What should you not say? That's how we do it. That's how we have to understand the markets. Access is important. And just as we sit in the room, believe you me, you really won't want to say too much to people that are not on the same page with you, on the same table. You know what I mean? That's access. You need to be on, like some of those places where they're talking about it. It may not be the time to even get any of the funding yet, but at least you begin to hear what it is about, how it is done, and so on. We need to create businesses, ladies and gentlemen. The businesses we're creating right in the bedroom, right in our dorm rooms, and so on, they are the large-scale businesses of tomorrow. Don't you remember? Mark Zuckerberg, he started from the garage, if you remember. That's where he started from, 1 or 2 people. The idea came, but he started. And then he gained access into some funding after he had run it for about 6-7 months. And that was the great start he had. It wasn't a huge success. No single bank funded it. It was a private equity. Private equity is like people have funds to deliver high returns but long term. You can plan with it and all that. Banks, they need to really see something they're funding, their products. I can't quantify the risk if I can see it. So private equity, venture capital groups, they take a risk on ventures like that. So don't throw your idea away. There's somebody waiting to fund it. You just need access. That's what I call wealth creation. It's your knowledge, the research that you're doing here that will help you to understand what's available in this market. Braiding here. I wouldn't believe it. You know how, of course, I'm a woman and I know what we do with those types of things, right? But I was very shocked to hear that it is $1 trillion market because women are always doing this and that. You know what I mean? You wouldn't even think twice about that type of business, but it is a major type of business. And so some women tell me and say, oh, this is all I know to do. It's not all you know to do. It's big business. Focus on what you know to do because everybody's got a talent. Everybody's got something inherent. You got to develop it. You got to come out with pride and say, this is it. That's how our mother sent us to school. They sold in the market, they managed the money, they fed the family, but they put some away to make sure we were educated. If they could do it, of course, they didn't have all the laptops and the iPads you have, but they had a small jot note. And they would put some of the spending amounts in it. And they were able to do their bookkeeping themselves. Please put on your thinking cap. And let's scale the ventures we're doing from the dorms. Because it will actually be the freedom you need for tomorrow. So that even if the job doesn't come quickly, then we can actually go back and say, this talent, I expressed it. A lot of people liked it when I was in school, and I can develop this. That's how we create wealth. And then as we put some structure to it, then it's sustainable in the long term. 2 years, 5 years, you find you're still running it. So let's create wealth and scale our ventures. Allyship matters. Find ecosystems of support. And I'm sure we understand allyship. People that are well aligned. Who are the people on that table? Okay, I can't get to this table. I know a lot of people say, oh, if I can't get to this table, I create my own table. That's fine. You can create your own table. But it takes a while. You have to create your own table too. It can be done, but it takes a while. If you're able to get into this, it's fine. If you're not able to get to this, what's the alternative? So I can't get into Deloitte, and I studied accounting, for instance. So the top 5, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC. But there's Grant Thornton. There are all those other ones. Why don't you start from there? And then we'll take it from there. All right? And then scale pathways. The federal government of Canada has $449 billion in budget of procurement, products that they sell every year. I mean, that they ask contractors to bid for. Things like in Africa where you say expression of interest, like in the papers, they publish it. They have it. 5% is the only part that black communities take every year in this country. So they said 95% for others, 5%. 5% not because they gave us 5%, but because we're not usually interested, maybe we don't know or whatever. 449 billion. And so we're not talking about aircraft alone, we're talking about supply of desks, catering for events, and so on. Little things. We can cater, we can do. We need to scale that. That's business. People need to do it. And we are mandated to also share that information because they do some work with us. So I want us to focus on these 3 areas. If you're able to start with these 3 areas to scale pathway, to form alliances, and to move forward, this will be helpful. So as I close today, I know that the incubators that we have managed have shown us that building businesses and enterprise is hard work. Partnerships take time, I know. Success comes slowly, for sure. But our measure of success must be the impact, the lives that were transformed, the leaders that have been built, and the ecosystems that have been strengthened. And this is why we join you today to celebrate award-winning researchers at MyRec today, so that the next decade is remembered not as the era where stereotypes held us back, but when our excellence broke every ceiling the block. That's what we must be celebrating in the next 10 decades. In closing, I reflect again on beyond the stereotype, African descent as architects of our excellence. Let us remember the words of the legend Nelson Mandela. I have learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but it is he who conquers that fear by acting. And I think that's what we just need to do. We have a lot. So distinguished colleagues today, let me be clear that we're not defined by our old labels, but by our impact, by our accomplishments, our resilience, and our vision for a better future for generations to come. So let us continue to transform barriers into breakthroughs by acting on our dreams today, despite the fears that we may feel. Thank you everyone for listening to me.